itself is divided between the Prasangika, Madhyamika, I don't want to get too far in the weeds, and then the Svatantrika, Madhyamika. At any rate, most of the Tibetan schools teach the Prasangika Madhyamika, and they all teach the Madhyamika. Then there is a school that was in India, which is very close and very influential, called the Yogacarya. It's the practice of yoga, the practice of oneness, basically. And in there's an elaborate kind of a discussion of the conceptual mind, or the mind that we experience. And it talks about 8 levels of consciousness. There's eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind. So there are the 6 consciousnesses, which you often hear spoken of. Our taste, our touch and feeling, sight, sound, smell. And then the 6th consciousness is the thinking mind. So that's our conceptual mind. And the Yogacarya posits 2 other consciousnesses above that. There's the alaya consciousness, which is the 8th consciousness. I'm skipping one right now. Alaya, like Himalaya. Himalaya means the storehouse of the snows. So the alaya consciousness is the storehouse consciousness. That's the 8th consciousness. And this is kind of like, it's a level of realization, to be sure. That's where all our karmic seeds are waiting to erupt. And that's where our karmic results, further karmic seeds are planted. So when something negative happens to us, for instance, and we experience the ripening of our past negative deed, that's erupting from the alaya, and then it's transmitted into our 6th consciousness, our thinking consciousness, by the 7th level of consciousness, which is called manas, which basically means mind. So it's like a conveyor belt between our ordinary level of conscious awareness, which is our senses and our thinking mind, and then the storehouse consciousness, the alaya, which is unseen to us, but has all these karmic seeds kind of lurking there, you might say. And then this means by which they're transmitted, called the manas, in between. So when he says the 8 levels of consciousness, that's what he's referring to here. And we'll talk about that a little bit today. So anyway, it's a conceptual framework that is a very profound Mahayana viewpoint. And there are many practices around it, and it's also referred to often in various texts and that. So they throw these terms out. And I actually have a book, the former head of the Nyingma. The Nyingma, the old school of Tibetan Buddhism, traditionally was not organized, was not centralized. It had many, many monasteries and nunneries and all sorts of stuff. And also yogis who were not, technically vows of celibacy, but were full-time practitioners, you might say. But they didn't organize themselves in a central way until after the Chinese invasion. And then for purposes of survival, when the lamas went to northern India, they started acknowledging someone as head of the lineage for survival purposes. So this first one was Drikung Rinpoche, and he was Lama Tarchin's teacher. And Drikung Rinpoche is incredible. He passed away, I think, in 1981, but he has this incredible book, which is the Nyingma tradition of Tibetan Buddhism. And it's just mind-bogglingly deep and heavy and long. But there's a companion book that comes with it, which is classifying like an index. And one part of the index is all the twos, everything when they say, the two truths, the two this, the two this, you can just look up twos, the threes, the fours. So it's very helpful. So when you see 6 consciousnesses, then you see the 7th consciousness, when you see the 8th consciousnesses or the 8th consciousness, it's very helpful. But nonetheless, that's the basic idea. So we're talking about 6 levels of consciousness. It's our ordinary awareness, including our conceptual awareness, our mind stream, and then the alaya, the storehouse consciousness, where these karmic seeds are there until the appropriate conditions arise, the contributing conditions arise in our ordinary 6 levels of consciousness. And that's what triggers out of this invisible realm, the alaya. And so it's an important teaching there, because you realize that when we suffer, for instance, that the cause of our suffering is actually in our own mind. And whatever the contributing, the triggering conditions are, they're important, but it's like each one of us is like a gallon of gasoline, and somewhere along the line, someone will strike a match. The whole worldly way is to attack that guy with the match. We're not looking at our potential really, and actually the root cause of our suffering is in our mind, in this unfortunately largely invisible mind. So at any rate, does that help at all?
It helps quite a bit. I'm still a little confused about disturbed consciousness.
Which consciousness?
Disturbed.
The third one?
Disturbed. Disturbed.
Where are we? Let me find it in the book, because I'm not.
Page 103.
Yeah, I'm on 103. Dualistic varied functions,
to which are added mental consciousness, disturbed consciousness, and potential for individualized consciousness.
Why am I not seeing this? 103. Okay.
So there's the functioning of the senses.
Yes. All right, I'm with you.
And about 10 lines under that.
Okay. The mental consciousness, disturbed consciousness, and potential of individualized consciousness.
Yeah. What's disturbed consciousness?
Disturbed consciousness?
Yeah, that's it.
I'm not sure exactly, but whenever I see disturbed, I think about the consciousness which is aware of, what are called the kleshas, the afflictions. So I think disturbed consciousness would be, when we are aware that we are angry, or the fact of being angry itself. Is that where we left off last time? I couldn't remember if we were in 102 or 103. Anybody know?
I think we were on 102 or 101.
No,
Yeah, I had the bookmark at 102. So why don't we just start there, and then we'll go through it, and feel free to ask when we get to functioning the senses even more. Okay?
That's very helpful, Frank. Thanks.
Okay. All right. So, yeah. And again, just as introduction, this book, Profound Buddhism, is this very brief kind of summary overview of the Buddhist path. He spends very little time, though, comparatively, on the self-liberation aspect, which is do no harm, which is I want to get out of suffering. And then he spends a little bit of time, so the Buddhist path is divided between the path of self-liberation and the path of Buddhahood, that is, liberating all sentient beings. So the path of liberating all sentient beings itself is divided into ordinary, conventional Mahayana, Maha meaning great, Yana meaning career or path. So the ordinary Mahayana that takes beings to Buddhahood. And then you have the extraordinary Mahayana path, which is called the Vajrayana, path of the Vajra, or the path of the Tantra, Tantrayana, or the path of the mantras, Mantrayana, sometimes called the diamond vehicle, all these various terms. So most of this book is about the Vajrayana, the tantric aspect, and these are the most really elaborate, highly symbolic, and easily misunderstood. The basic path, again, on self-liberation is do no harm. You learn what the non-virtues are, and you just stay away from them. But then the conventional Mahayana, now we're actually engaging with some of these disturbing mind states. And in this case, the disturbing would be even something like love and compassion. So we're using our kind of natural kind of attachment and clinging, but we're purifying it by understanding it and purifying the object. So, for instance, you understand that giving is a virtue, and so it's not just staying away from harming others, but now you're trying to help others. And then it becomes more and more with your experience, what's helpful, what isn't helpful. It isn't necessarily helping someone who's about to kidnap someone to give them aid so they can do that. There's still some virtue in giving because it's still sort of a denial of the self, but we learn better objects of giving. We become more skillful in our giving, and then there are all the perfections that are listed. So that's the conventional Mahayana. The basic core of the conventional Mahayana is this mind called bodhicitta. Bodhi means awakening, citta mind, awakening mind, the mind that's on the way to Buddhahood. And there's just many, many, many teachings that allow us to train our mind in this way and train our mind in bodhicitta. And bodhicitta, to give you an idea of the conventional nature of this, there's all of relative or conventional bodhicitta. That is the aspiration to lead all beings to Buddhahood. And then it's actually doing something about that. It's taking a step on the path. And now this practice of loving kindness and compassion completely includes not harming others. So there's no conflict there. But the practice is the relative bodhicitta, the conventional bodhicitta, is this aspiration to liberate beings, take them all the way to Buddhahood, and then taking steps in that way. So the image they often use is, I want to go to Washington, D.C. That's aspiration. But then you take a step in that direction. That is the engaging bodhicitta. And these are extremely powerful mind states. It's said that one who engages within the conventional engaging bodhicitta, it's like you just open up your mind to the influence of your deeper mind, you might say, or the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in ways that you can't imagine. It's just tremendously significant. Bodhicitta itself now, we're still in the conventional Mahayana. Bodhicitta itself, there's the relative conventional that I've just described, aspirational, engaging bodhicitta, but then there's also absolute bodhicitta. Absolute bodhicitta is the recognition, the awareness of the nature of the mind, our Buddha nature, and abiding in that awareness. One gets to the absolute bodhicitta by way of the relative bodhicitta, practicing all these virtues of giving, of ethics, of joyful continuation of the practice, of meditation, of practicing discriminating wisdom, what's helpful and what isn't helpful. So that's all the conventional Mahayana. It uses our dualistic conventional mind, which of course is the source of great power. And in the midst of that, it recognizes our true nature and leads us to the realization of that, which then abiding in the true nature itself, there's a further kind of higher level, you might say, purification that happens until one attains to Buddhahood. Now, what most of this book is about is the unconventional Mahayana. Again, the Vajrayana, Tantrayana, And this word Vajrayana, Vajra is the Sanskrit word. Tibetans translated it as Dorje. Dor means stone, and J means Lord. So Lord of the Stones, in other words, a diamond. I used to joke with people because I don't know any Tibetan really. And I would tease people sometimes that all of us know a little Tibetan, because if you've ever had Darjeeling tea, Dorje Ling, it's a Tibetan word. Ling means place. So Dorje Ling is the place of the Dorje. So these particular mountains where they grow this tea, where the Darjeeling tea comes from, in Sikkim especially, it's called the place of the Dorje, like a sacred place, but Darjeeling tea. So in the Vajrayana, in the extraordinary Mahayana, the practice is said to be very easy, but at the same time, subtle. So it's said, for instance, one of these great figures in Tibetan Buddhism, I think it was Sangha, but I don't know, again, more than 1,000 years ago. Sangha had no difficulty practicing self-liberation practice, do no harm. He did that pretty easily. And then he entered into the conventional Mahayana, and where you consider all beings as having been your mother, and you're always thinking like that and relating to the world in that very skillful and true way. And he said that was very difficult. I had to work at it. But finally, after a long time, I was able to maintain that kind of practice of just natural, boundless, loving kindness and compassion, motivating everything you do. That is the conventional Mahayana. And he said, then I tried to enter into the unconventional Mahayana, the Vajrayana, where now instead of bodhicitta transforms, and the practice becomes one of pure vision. And what that means is there are 5 aspects to it. We consider all beings as high-level bodhisattvas, male and female. We consider our teacher as an actual Buddha, not just someone farther along the path or experience, but an actual Buddha. We consider the teachings to be the stainless Vajrayana highest teachings. We consider the time to be timeless, and we consider this place to be a pure land. That is a land without suffering, a land where everything is conducive to the further development of our mind. So that's a very hard practice, because as soon as your boss frowns at you and you don't consider him a high bodhisattva, you're sort of falling out of the practice. So Asanga said, yes, I tried the Vajrayana, but it was just too difficult. It's said that the practice is like in the self-liberation practice, do no harm. If you break one of those vows, it's kind of a serious thing. It's like this clay cup that is smashed. And similarly in the conventional Mahayana, the cups are easily broken. They're like maybe more like wooden cups there, a little more resilient, because you're dealing with motivation and not so much the actual act per se. But at any rate, can be done, but is difficult. There are practices to restore our view. We generate bodhicitta again for all the beings, and we take refuge in the Buddha and in the wisdom aspect. But in the Vajrayana, it's said, although they're silver cups, it's a very high practice, very easily dented. But the good thing is it's very easily repaired too. So the Vajrayana is this remarkable body of teachings and practice in which we are visualizing ourselves as a Buddha, and we're speaking as a Buddha with mantra. And everything is this maintenance of pure vision. Now, it's based on a different kind of assumption, you might say, or they're both based on reality. But in the conventional Mahayana, we practice, if you've ever been to a Zen center, they put their hands in the meditation mudra, and you have the left hand on top, this gentle kind of gesture in your lap with your hands, and the left hand is on top. Why? Because the left hand is wisdom, is female. The right hand is male and skillful means. So in the conventional Mahayana, we are practicing the seeds of awakening. We're practicing the seeds of Bodhi. But because we're not enlightened, we don't view ourselves as enlightened, our action, our right hand, always gets us kind of in trouble, can get us in trouble. So it's suppressed by the left hand, by wisdom. So we're always maintaining our mind of wisdom first, like that. But in the symbolism, in the Vajrayana, this is called the causal path of Buddhahood. And it works. We're practicing the causes of Buddhahood. The belief is that if we practice these causes, awakening will result down the line, sometime in the future. That's how we think. Or even in the next instant. We're thinking in that timeline kind of way. But in the Vajrayana, instead of being a causal path, it's a resultant path. And the hand mudra, you have the right on top of the left. It's the same basic mudra, meditation mudra, but now the right is on top. And why? Because Buddha said that we are Buddhas right now, we just don't know it. He said every being is a Buddha. All beings are Buddhas, but we just don't know it. So because it's actually more true that I'm a Buddha right now than I am this sentient being banging around in samsara, that's closer to my true nature, it's actually valid to visualize yourself as a Buddha, even though that seems kind of like pretend or imagination. And in the beginning, it is imagination, but it's more than that. So we practice the result, because the thought is, if you consider yourself as a Buddha instead of this suffering sentient being, there's a natural purification that happens. Your Buddha nature starts to seep through your ordinary consciousness in ways that can't be predicted, but work. And we have, thousands of years of experience to give us a little faith in this. The Tibetans say that these Vajrayana practices are the ones that are most efficacious for our particular time. It's said in the Buddha himself taught very little of the Vajrayana. They lived in a time when there was, great merit, you might say. People were less distracted. But our time, according to the Tibetans, and not just the Tibetans, is a time with upside down time, that where people see, first of all, the negative emotions, the afflictive emotions are very rough. They're just very strong. And secondly, we see things upside down in the sense that the society itself, and us then through our conditioning, we often see non-virtuous things as being virtuous. And we see virtuous things as being non-virtuous. And of course, there's so much of this. So the Vajrayana uses not just our desire, loving kindness and compassion, but uses desire, uses even anger. Now, it's not using hatred, but it's using the anger that's at the core of hatred. So it's using the energy of all of these different mind states. And that's why one reason it's powerful. But of course, it's jumping right into Buddhahood, and that's a real challenge for us. And yet they say the practice is easy. Why? Because it uses all the senses. And it's sort of all there for us. And in the Vajrayana, for the teachers, accomplished teachers, it's extremely skillful. It's like a great doctor that knows all the different disciplines and mindsets. So it's very powerful. So that's what most of this book is about. And so if it starts seeming especially, esoteric or something, yes, there's a whole different language. And that's what we'll get into. So yeah, starting out then on page 102 in the book. Last time, Kalu Rinpoche was touching on the description of the subtle body. Again, this body that we don't see, but that's extremely skillful to use in meditation. These are often called the 6 yogas of Naropa. And they imagine this in our subtle body, it's permeated by hollow tubes called channels, 72,000 of them. And in those channels are rushing energies, winds, prana, called lung in Tibetan, but prana in Sanskrit. And then there are these tiglis, these just little drops that are like the essence of Buddhahood, the Dharmakaya, that these can be manipulated also. So again, highly esoteric, but accessible at the same time. And then he was describing those, but then he got into a little bit of Tibetan medicine too, because it's related. So I think he's going to continue with some of that. 102, material and spiritual treatments. The main remedy for these 404 types of sickness consists of practicing the Dharma, main remedy. By practicing the Dharma with our body, speech, and mind, we purify many negative karmic potentials within us. And by doing so, we uproot the illnesses they would have produced. When one is confronted with illnesses provoked by the collection of the 8 great classes of harmful spirits, each one having subsections, one will find the best remedy to be rituals of the Dharma. But apart from the spiritual approach to healing, and to the extent we actually attribute a material reality to our body, we also have material treatments like medicine, acupuncture, and surgery. But again, their beneficial effects cannot be considered outside a spiritual context, since they reflect our merit associated with the compassion of the Buddhas. Tibetan medicine, the traditional Buddhist medicine, is not the only method for easing the suffering of illness. In a certain sense, one can consider all medicine as a manifestation of awakening. Buddhist medicine goes back to the time of Shakyamuni Buddha, who, once taking the form of the Buddha Sanjamena, that's the medicine Buddha, expounded the 8 branches of the medical art in the 4 tantras of medicine. Even if other medical traditions do not offer the aspect of having been revealed, spiritually revealed, they nevertheless are the expression of awakening. Our actual mind is the conjunction of 2 aspects. One aspect is pure, comparable to clear water, called the potential of primordial awareness. So in Sanskrit, alaya jnana, there's that alaya word. Here, meaning potential, but again, the vast storehouse. And jnana is knowing in an absolute sense. So our actual mind is the conjunction of 2 aspects. One aspect is pure, comparable to clear water, called the potential of primordial awareness, alaya jnana. This is the source of all positive manifestations of the mind. The other aspect is impure as a muddied water, forming the potential of individualized consciousness, alaya vijnana. Now look at that word, that alaya vijnana. I think it's so fascinating because up above, what's the pure mind? Alaya jnana. So knowing the alaya, knowing all the potentials. And the individualized consciousness, the impure, is alaya vijnana. What is V? V is just 2. It's just dividing. So jnana is knowing, and V is that we know by the opposites. This is the dualistic mind that all of us are born with. So you see also kind of the great utility of Sanskrit and the Tibetans. Of course, if you know Tibetan, they translated all these things consciously over several hundred years, completely developing a written Tibetan language, and of course their Dharma language. So it has that same kind of precision, which is very helpful because for us, we don't have this. And I mean, we do in some aspects, of course, in our own cultures, But when it comes to Buddhism, there's often subtle kind of misunderstandings. And I've always found that so helpful. You know that jnana is this knowing, the knowing aspect of the mind, primordial knowing doesn't have to be developed. It's just there, can be covered over, needs to be revealed, but we're not manufacturing. It's unfabricated. One example of this, maybe it's helpful right now, when we talk about, again, the conventional Mahayana or the unconventional, the extraordinary Mahayana, it's in the conventional Mahayana, we are practicing the perfections, the 6 perfections. We are perfecting our mind. So we start with our ordinary mind and higher, going up to what? To the perfection of wisdom. But in the Vajrayana, instead of practicing, and that's called Sherab in Tibetan, Sherab, perfection of wisdom. In the Vajrayana, we're practicing jnana in Sanskrit or yeshe in Tibetan. This is primordial wisdom. So they're the same at the end result, so to speak. But with the conventional Mahayana, here I am, deluded sentient being. I'm making my delusion less and less and less, attaining to levels of wisdom, higher, until ultimately to Buddhahood. With yeshe, with the primordial wisdom, you're doing this remarkable thing of saying, I'm practicing Buddhahood from the get-go, even though that seems artificial and seems like you're imagining or playing a game. But you're looking at everything down, so to speak, looking at everything through this lens of pure vision. So that's the power of it. That's the immediacy of it. That's the directedness of it. But nonetheless, it's sort of a different idea. So vijnana as opposed to jnana. This is the source, this individualized consciousness. This is the source of all negative activities producing the suffering of samsara. And what a profound statement that is. Pure primordial awareness and ordinary individualized consciousness dwell together within our mind. Beneficial and useful substances taken from plants, animals, or minerals can be used as remedies, and the art of using them are the reflection of primordial awareness. Harmful substances and their utilization are the reflection of ordinary consciousness. In this sense, all medicines, whether Tibetan or Western, are an expression of the purity of the mind. It is my personal conviction, this is Kalu Rinpoche, that all medical arts are the activity of awakening, a conviction that can be shared by everyone. So you see something very Buddhist in this, that our ordinary mind is this mix. We have this inherent primordial awareness. Generally, it's almost totally covered over by our individual consciousness. We're filtering everything through this individualized lens, so to speak. Everything's interpreted in terms of I and me and I, good or bad, all these dualisms that we have. And yet, our true mind is always there. And we're actually experiencing it all the time, but we're kind of coloring it. We're putting stains on it. We're putting our own interpretation on it. It's so funny. Also, we're getting into the next section now, but to jump ahead a little bit. So when we talk about the 8 levels of consciousness, for instance, and again, the first 5 are our sensual apparatus. The 6th level of consciousness is our thinking mind. The 5, eye, ear, nose, tongue, and body, are direct. They have a directness to them. And you think about this. You wake up in the morning and you see the sun. It's this direct experience. It's unmediated by any kind of anything. It's right there. It's like when you jump into a tub of cold water. I mean, it's vivid. We remember these things, and you can, even from your childhood, people remember these seemingly unimportant events, but they were somehow very vivid to the senses. I mean, it's like seeing a field of dandelions the first time when you're 4 years old or something. It's like that. Now, the sixth level of consciousness, the conceptual mind, the mind stream, is a reactive consciousness. So it is indirect. And this is sort of how we get into trouble. I mean, in other words, you hear a beautiful piece of music or just a beautiful tone. That's your true nature right there. But what do? I like that. I don't like that. Oh, that sounds like Mick Jagger. No. Yeah. All that stuff is where we get into trouble. We can't accept the purity of our own mind. And it's because, it's just because. It's just obscured. All of these practices, whether they're the conventional Mahayana, whether they're the extraordinary Mahayana, they're purifying the mind. It's the path of purification. We add to that purification sort of a gentler type of purification, which is the accumulation of merit. So if you're, working very hard to help someone, there's a purification in that too, but it's this positive that you're doing. And just the fact that you're doing the positive means that you're not doing the negative. So there's an actual purification, but it's kind of secret purification. Whereas sometimes there's big time purification. The rug gets pulled out from under you. You have, the loss of a child, the loss of a loved one, a relationship. You get fired from your job. You get in a car accident. These sudden traumatic things don't have to be sudden, don't have to be traumatic, but any kind of a loss is a purification. The pain in your knees when you're trying to do a meditation retreat, struggling with all the thoughts in the mind. These are all more conscious type of purification. What we can have faith in is that this is a process, because of cause and effect, that works, that is doing something. It's not just mindless suffering going around and around in circles, although we can experience it that way. All right, so functioning of the senses. The body is the support of functioning for the 8 types of dualistic consciousness. These 8 consciousnesses are mind only. In Yogacara, when I mentioned that school, particular philosophical school, Yogacara means mind only. It's the mind only school. So this is kind of, again, as the higher philosophical views include, so to speak, the lower philosophical views, like Kalu Rinpoche has taught, these different facets of this wonderful, fantastic diamond that we have, this Dorje, this Vajra. So they're not in opposition to each other. We often think that our own Western tradition, of course, has so much kind of religious heavy duty fighting, because you're wrong. But the Buddhist view is much different. So at any rate, these 8 consciousnesses are mind only, but they have varied functions, just as the fingers are part of a unique hand. The 5 sense organs correspond to 5 consciousnesses: visual, auditory, olfactory, gustatory, and tactile consciousness, to which are added mental consciousness, disturbed consciousness, and potential of individualized consciousness. Oh, okay. Let's talk about this again. Yeah, here's what they're talking about. That they're describing, in terms that I hadn't heard used before, most of them, the 8 consciousnesses. So what I called the potential, what I called the alaya, is the potential of individualized consciousnesses. And what I called the manas, the 7th level of consciousness, he's translated as disturbed consciousness. So here we go. We've got 5 levels of sensuous consciousness. We've got the 6th level of the reactive mind stream, conceptual mind, thinking mind. Then we have, again, the 8th one is this vast potential that's out there with these karmic seeds sitting there unseen. But the 7th one, this manas, this conveyor belt, it's the disturbed consciousness, how that functions. So in other words, here we are, 5 consciousnesses, and something happens. So with my 5 consciousness, my consciousness of feeling, suddenly I'm extremely hot, And then my sixth consciousness is thinking, damn, it's hot. How do I get out of this? There's a disturbing factor going on there. That disturbed quality is, as you say, by the conveyor belt, the seventh level of consciousness, the manas, is conveyed up to the eighth level of consciousness, the alaya, the storehouse. And those conditions, the seed comes down, so to speak, again, transmitted by this conveyor belt into our conscious awareness, and it manifests, the karma manifests as some sort of difficulty or suffering. So we experience it that way. So it's a very elaborate kind of theory, but that's what they're talking about. The disturbed consciousness is the seventh level of consciousness between the peace of the eighth level, the alaya, the storehouse consciousness, peaceful up there, but has the potential for individualized consciousness. And then the already individualized consciousness of senses and thinking mind, which are this mix of impure and pure, and then the conveyor belt, which handles the disturbances back and forth, connects the two, you might say. Okay, so the sense organs through which the consciousnesses function are themselves activated by their internal parts, as described in the following metaphor: a daisy for the eye, a piece of tree bark for the ear, a needle of copper for the nose, a moon for the tongue, the down of a bird for tactile sense, a sphere of crystal for the mind. Boy, this is heavy Tibetan symbolism. When an illness affects any one of these organs, the organ does not feel suffering or sickness, but the corresponding consciousness does. In cases of serious illness, communication with the object of the perception may be interrupted. This is what happens in the case of troubles producing blindness or deafness, for example. At the time of death, the body becomes a house abandoned by its inhabitant. As the functioning of the senses is a manifestation of the mind, when the mind leaves the body, sense organs can no longer function. However, these organs themselves are only a product of the mind, and the mind can create them anew in other circumstances of existence. We have proof of this each night when we dream. At that time, we no longer perceive the external world, but we see with our eyes of dream. We hear sounds with our ears of dream, and so on. This is only the product of our mind. All phenomena are neither real nor unreal, and this also applies to the sense organs. On the one hand, we cannot say that the sense organs are unreal because they can be afflicted by pain and illness, which make us feel these organs as truly existent. On the other hand, we cannot assert that they are totally real, since they are only creation of the mind, as we know by the experience of dream. The practice of the Dharma leads to developing more powerful sensory abilities than those we now have. It allows us to obtain, for example, what is called the divine eye and the divine ear. With the divine eye, one can see objects in the distance without difficulty, objects that we cannot usually see. With the divine ear, one hears sounds that normally cannot be perceived, and so on. So a little bit of discussion here. Important point here, Buddhism is not throwing away your senses. The Buddha tried that. He tried this incredible ascetic path, and he almost killed himself. And he saw that all he was going to do was going to have killed himself and not come to any kind of enlightenment as to understanding the cause of suffering and its relief. These teachings of, like someone says, we live in a modern age. The scientific revolution has been so powerful, and all the creation of this outer stuff from the Industrial Revolution and further, that it kind of dulls us in a way. And we have this bias, without even thinking about it, that neurons create our mind. That's the basic scientific view. It's really unexamined, because really consciousness is, they don't know anything about it. But nonetheless, still, the bias is a material understanding of things. That the neurons that we have are creating our mind, our consciousness. The Buddhist view is reverse. Consciousness, or our mind has created consciousness, but our mind has created the neurons themselves. It's a radical view, but of course, turns things upside down. And like I like to say, like it says in the Bible, Jesus said, you will know the tree by the fruit. So that's something for us. These understandings, though, and these teachings are just permeated through everything, especially in the Vajrayana, this kind of understanding. So, for instance, when we visualize, you learn about the different visualizations, like of a peaceful Buddha. Peaceful Buddha is sitting on a moon disk seat. These are the 5 senses, the 5 direct experiences of our Buddha nature in this dualistic way, our senses. These are the moon. Why the moon? Because the moon is completely beautiful. The moon has this wonderful, clear, cool, illuminating light. So if you're in India and it's burning hot, but at night the moon illuminates, but without that roughness, so to speak. So this is the symbolism, and this is why the peaceful deities are sitting on a moon disk. The wrathful deities, instead, are sitting on a sun disk. The sun represents our 6th level of consciousness, our thinking mind, because that's a little more dangerous. It's actually very powerful, but it can burn if we don't have the right understanding. So all of these things are just, the skillfulness of these cause and effects are just permeated throughout all of the Vajrayana teachings, the conventional Mahayana too. But you'll see these things pop up again and again. All right, so then he gets into a question answer now. It says, now perhaps the best way to continue this teaching would be a short period of questions and answers. So question, what relationship is there between the tiglis, the bindus, visualized during the practice of special shine, special calming the mind, and the tiglis of the body? All right, so first of all, shine is the Tibetan word for shamatha in Sanskrit. We call it calm abiding or calming the mind meditation. The basic concentration practices where we keep our mind one-pointedly focused on an object of meditation, whatever that might be, and just keep bringing the mind back to the awareness of our chosen object of practice again and again and again. You can have 2 types of distractions. One is overexcited, where the mind is going off, thinking about what you're going to do tomorrow, or thinking about some harm that's been done in the past, or some good thing you want to do, whatever the agitation, like excitation of the mind, you forget the object of meditation. But then you remember and you bring it back. The other side is your mind gets too dull. This can be like depression, not necessarily psychological depression, but just, you're just dull. You're just dulling out, and you're just kind of so tired that you lose the clear awareness of the object of meditation, but you catch yourself and bring it back. So that's shine. And the footnote says a practice of shine during which one visualizes the 5 elements in colored geometrical forms, also called tiglis. All right, this is a particular, in constructing a mandala visually, mentally, there are practices where you build up the different, using different elements symbolized by different shapes. You see this more in Japan. They have these, I don't know what they're called, but they have this expression of the 5 levels, central levels of the mind, expressed as these little structures. You see them in cemeteries and around, where they'll have there's a triangle, and then there's a sphere, and then there's a half sphere, and at any rate, like this. All right, so person's asking, what's the relationship between the tiglis visualized during this particular practice of creating these and the tiglis of the body? So the tiglis of the body, these dots of mind that can be used to zoom through riding with this energy, this lung, through channels. So, for instance, you can move the tiglis, the essence of your mind, into the central channel, and there are all these manifestations. At any rate, Kalu Rinpoche, there is definitely a relationship, since subtle channels, winds, and the tiglis, the drops of the body, are a product of the mind, and the tiglis, drops of the meditation, are also a product of the mind. Question: can we consider the tiglis as reserves of energy? Can we compare them, for example, to preserved food? If we damage them, does it mean that we may use this food? And finally, when this food is exhausted, does death occur? Kalu Rinpoche: damaging the tiglis does not mean that we lose all the tiglis themselves. We are not going to die from this. The tigli is not limited to sexual substance. It is a little like milk. In milk, a certain substance will give us butter if it is churned, but not all milk is transformed into butter. What we lose is the essence of the milk, or the essence of the tigli. This part is what would become butter. Not everything disappears. So unfortunately, I don't know this practice he's talking about, this special shine. So he's referring to a practice that I just don't know. How are the tiglis produced on the physical level? We absorb food, and this food passes into the blood. It is said that the essence of the blood passes into the flesh, the essence of the flesh into the adipose, the fat tissues, the tissue essence into the bones, and the essence of the bone into the marrow. The essence of the marrow produces the red and white tiglis. The essence of these tiglis, again, these little drops, these red and white visualized drops that are used in this subtle internal meditation. The essence of the tiglis, and it is this that can be damaged, gives from a physical point of view the radiance of the body, and from a mental point of view, inner well-being, joy, and psychic balance. The process of metabolizing begins with the intake of food and ends in the tiglis that give the body brilliance and mental happiness if one does not damage them. It is also said that these metabolic processes produce the inert substances of our body, such as nails, hair, and hairs. So this is highly, highly esoteric. To give you a general idea, perhaps, though, Lama Tarchin described this kind of practice as, it's as if, I sometimes call it genetic engineering, because we're going to a very, very deep, invisible kind of level, and you can have dramatic effects. And Lama Tarchin said it's as if there's a vast mountain, and on that mountain is a mountain lake filled with water. And that's your suffering. That water is your suffering. Now, with these practices, the mountain disappears. And because the mountain disappears, the lake disappears automatically and instantaneously. So it's very, very dramatic, very powerful. All right, another question. Are the subtle channels equivalent to the meridians in acupuncture? Kalu Rinpoche: I have no great knowledge of this subject. I only know that there are points where one places acupuncture needles to heal certain areas of the body, but I know nothing more. Question. In the biography of Shakyamuni Buddha, the historical Buddha, there are few miraculous cases of healing. I do not know Buddhist literature very well, but it seems to me that the biography of the Mahasiddhas, the great siddhas, greatly enlightened beings, and the great Tibetan yogis contain many miracles, but few healings. By comparison, in the life of the Christ and Christian saints, frequent causes of miraculous healings are reported. Is there a reason, due to the spiritual laws of Buddhism, which make it so that the great physician who was the Buddha has not made or has not given many examples of miraculous healing? Kalu Rinpoche: it seems that there are no fundamental differences between Buddhism and Christianity on this point. However, it is necessary to understand that a highly spiritual being cannot act in a precise way towards another if there is no specific karma link with this being in the past. Without this link, it is not possible to dissipate suffering. There are many times when the Buddha and Mahasiddhas dissipated suffering of innumerable beings with whom they had a link. It is similar for Christ and the Christian saints. Okay. Why don't we stop there for tonight and discussion? Any questions that people might have? Now, you will notice with Khenpo teaching that he's teaching in the classical way. The Tibetans understand that there has to be a grounding, at least a deep confidence in this vast loving kindness and compassion. The sutra level, the conventional levels of the teachings has to be understood to a degree because of the power of the Vajrayana methods. They can be misused. If a person is doing this for their own kind of, who knows what, thrills or ego, like the Dalai Lama says, the reason we practice the Vajrayana is because it's the fastest way to liberate beings, not because we want enlightenment. That's so mind-boggling to me, because we're all thinking, I mean, it's very natural and nothing wrong with it. You know, we naturally start with, I want to lessen my own suffering. That's a good motivation. And then, you know, we build into, we learn about and start training ourselves in this way that I'm working for the happiness of others. But the Vajrayana is so tempting because one can sort of stumble onto it. Of course, you don't because of your merit and karma. There are no mistakes like that. But the Vajrayana actually generates bliss. And it rides bliss. It uses the energy of bliss to take us to the extreme skillfulness of helping sentient beings and to enlightenment. But of course, that bliss can be kind of distracting nonetheless. It's like I think of that Rolling Stones song. I so date myself with these examples. But hey, hey, get off of my cloud. Like, what are you doing on my heavenly cloud? This town's not big enough for you and me together. But even understanding the complete profundity of that view, that attitude, that it's all about sentient beings. It's not even about clinging to our own enlightenment. It's just really mind-boggling. So nonetheless, these teachings, because they are especially efficacious for a time and necessary for a time, the Tibetans offer the full range. There's also, I think it was Bob Thurman at Columbia, made the statement. He said, in our culture with our kind of outward materialistic view, he was speaking, this is like 30 years ago now when I heard him say this, or when he wrote it down. Our ideal is kind of like the astronaut. We're going out farther and farther and farther, and this is a great thing. Benefits come from it. And occasionally we blow up some of these guys and women. But nonetheless, for society, that doesn't stop us because we see the benefits. So we're just going out and out and out. Well, for the Buddhists, we're going in and in and in. And the difference in this approach to the Tantra is that the Dalai Lama's school, the Gelugpa of the four great traditions within Tibetan Buddhism, Dalai Lama would say 5, but in the 4 Buddhist traditions, the Gelugpa, shining virtue it means, those who practice shining virtue. They say that the Tantra can be dangerous, so you need to practice conventional bodhicitta for like 20 years, and then you start your study of the Tantra. Now, in our particular tradition, the Kagyu, Ka is speech, Gyu is secret speech, the esoteric teachings, the very powerful transmitted teachings. And with the Nyingma, the ancient ones, they say, yes, that's true. The Tantra can be misused. There are risks and dangers, but at the same time, life is short. We got to take some risk. So Bob Thurman compared practicing the Tantra, going in and in and in with some risks, to us shooting the astronauts out and out and out, seeking outer knowledge. But yet, I think it's important in this book that he's giving this outline because it gives us more confidence, raises questions, things that we can bring up. So a Khenpo's approach is very much that first one. You want to be really solid on loving kindness and compassion and have developed that, at least great faith in it. You don't have to be a saint before you practice the Vajrayana. But you have to have this understanding that's all about bodhicitta. The mind of the Buddha that you are visualizing is total bodhicitta. And that prevents certain problems. And then there are other things too. In a recognized lineage with great teachers that you have this bond, samaya, this bond of trust with, respect and obligations, all those kinds of things are protective. A Sangha, so you're not out there by yourself, just trying to do stuff, you're radically apart from other practitioners. Because in that way you see, Sangha is like the nurses. When you have some difficulty, great, medium, or minor, you've got people there who can help. Okay, sorry, I'm just going on and on and on. Patty.
Hi, I have two questions.
Yeah.
Two clarification questions. So when we talk about the 6 consciousnesses and then this 7th one, the manas or mind, and then the 8th one, and you were saying it's like a conveyor belt between the two? Between 6 and 8 you have 7 and it's a conveyor belt?
Yeah, it's the link.
Okay.
It's the link between our conscious experience, our sensual experience, and our even mental interpretation of it, and that infinite potential, the karmic seeds that are resting up there.
The storehouse of seeds.
The storehouse.
Okay.
So it's like our immediate, this lifetime kind of experience shoots a message up to, to the Alaya, and the Alaya sends down the appropriate result, so to speak. Yeah.
That helps. Thank you.
Yeah.
And then one other clarification on you said something about genetic engineering, and then you said, like the mountain, if the mountain disappears, then the lake of suffering disappears. So I'm a little confused about that. Are you saying, like, if the mountain were to just have a volcano and blow up or something like that, and there was a lake on top of that mountain, then it goes away too, like all the suffering?
Yeah, I shouldn't be mixing metaphors, genetic engineering with suffering lakes, right? What the hell is he talking about? No, that's just my own idea of the fact that this genetic engineering, we can't see it. It's so small, it's so subtle, and yet it can have big effects. So similarly, and then the lake of suffering, yeah, it's a good image that Lama Tarchin gave. Here's this mountain, our ordinary perception, that is upholding a lake of suffering. And the practice of the Vajrayana, we dissolve that concept we have of the mountain. So the mountain is mind created. So we destroy that, and in the natural result is that the lake of suffering is gone, because it depends on being held up by this structure. So rather than saying that the mountain blows its top, which might give the wrong image, you can think of it that way too, but better. It's just gone. Just gone. Yeah. Pass the mic down to George.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I'm so sorry I was late. It was really stupid. So I was reading this, and I was going back over the reading you probably covered last week, where this Bodhi or someone, could see the connection between this woman who was eating her father, her child was this other person, this enemy, right? And she was disdaining her mother with the dog,
right?
And meanwhile, I was having a BLT. I'm wondering about. I was just kind of thinking about my relationship to bacon, why I can't be a vegetarian. So, and then I looked at the clock. I was like, oh, you should be there now. And I was really just. So at any rate, it just shows you can read something and it takes you off on a wild journey.
Yeah, right.
But as you were talking, I went on a few of them. So one was kind of this Vasabundi and the Yogacara school, and
Yeah.
how revolutionary that was, and how it also changed concepts of karma.
Mhm.
And so this whole idea of karmic seed, i.e., is karmic seed something that you have
Mhm.
that is ripening or not ripening to fruition, or is karma that you actually change through the bodhisattva path?
Yeah, excellent.
By creating good deeds, and so there's all of that
Yeah.
goes into it. So there's that question.
Yeah, all these conceptual frameworks, not to interrupt you, but the first question.
I want to,
All these conceptual frameworks are helpful, but they're all just conceptual frameworks.
Right.
So I sometimes think of it like gravity. With Newton, so I remember in physics class in high school, the teacher would take a tennis ball and have a rope on it and be spinning around his head. And so gravity for Newton was this direct force, this direct line between the object and the source of the gravity. So it was like that. But then when Einstein comes around, we're still using the same word gravity, but now it's just this sort of cavity in space that makes objects go in that direction. There's no rope between them. So it's a subtler understanding. It's in the actual process going on rather than like a substance. So similarly with karma. I mean, on one level, it's very kind of seemingly mechanistic. On the outer level, you do this, you're planting a seed, and it's going to ripen sometime in the future. But when they get into the Yogacara, it's this infinite potential of individualized consciousness. And normally, for most of us, in our individualized consciousness is where we're going, right? We don't see the inherent suffering and limitations and frustration in our individualized consciousness. And yet, the Buddha rejected the ascetic path. It's not throwing that out and saying this is worthless. No, suddenly we see how the individualized consciousness is jnana also, but it's vijnana, knowing by the opposites.
right. I was just struck by it. So you can't have the Vajrayana unless you have this change of not just how karma functions, but change of sort of tying karma to the bodhisattva path.
Yeah, it's a higher
Directly.
view. It's a higher
Directly.
view. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and that's something I want to think some more about. And then the other thing was kind of interpolating moon discs with the early Mahayana, not with Huiming, but the Xiao Zhaoping,
Uh-huh.
the luminescent mind and dual and non-dual thinking
Uh-huh.
through the mirroring of
Uh-huh.
the moon,
Uh-huh.
mirroring of the moon, and it seems to me that by seating peaceful deities on the moon disk,
Uh-huh.
one makes them masters of non-dual thinking.
I think that's right.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that's and
Right.
by putting the fierce deities in surrounding with fire, you're saying, and emotions as tools
And skillfulness,
and
the activity
and skillful means,
aspect.
and
Yeah,
skillful means.
exactly. Powerful, skillful means.
Yeah. So yeah.
I know the symbol, and it's like that because it's like there's so many different levels of symbolism, and you sort of start discovering them. Even they just kind of hit at you in a glancing blow, and sometime you're reading about it or thinking about it. Suddenly, someone that somebody else saw 13 years ago, something is just dawning on me now. You know what I mean? I mean, we're all on a different path. We're all on the same path, but we're all on a different path. It's individualized because of our individualized consciousness. But at the same time, I love that vijnana, that absolute awareness is in that vijnana, our consciousness.
But in the Vajrayana, a question I have is, does Shakyamuni then winds up moving into the realm of a peaceful deity?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Rather than just a Buddha.
Right. And that's the difference between saying the Theravada and the Mahayana. because in the Theravada, he was a human being,
Correct.
one Buddha, this world cycle, and we're all trying to get to nirvana. Whereas in the Mahayana, yes, he was a Buddha, and there are many Buddhas. So it's just a difference in sort of a difference in view. Yeah.
Great. All right.
At the end there, he was saying something about you can't help someone else unless you have a past karmic link.
Mm.
I mean, don't we have a past karmic link with all beings? Or
We
is
do.
that how we're supposed to
We
just
do.
think about
But
it?
he was talking about something like completely dissolving,
Like miracle.
like a miracle healing. Yeah, he was specifically talking about miracles.
Okay.
Amazing things can happen. It's said so. For instance, in Dzogchen, they talk about it's the great faith of the practitioner, the enlightened teacher, and it's like a hook and a ring. The teacher has this ring, or I can't remember which way, who has the ring and who has the hook, but at any rate, it hooks in immediately. Doesn't know any of the teachings, doesn't know anything, but just has this tremendous confidence. So the example that we have in our own tradition is Jigten Sumgen is said to be like a snow mountain. And that ice, Garamche is always teaching about ice and water. They're the same thing, but they're in different states. Normally our mind is in a frozen state, but it is the devotion, again, not blind faith, but the intelligent, experiential, and who knows from what, mysterious, vast devotion that melts that glacier, and then the water flows automatically down to us. So it's an instantaneous kind of thing. And, to one degree or another, we've all experienced that too. But in this case, he was talking about a miraculous kind of thing where there's like some fantastic, dramatic kind of healing, the kind of thing that you always read about Jesus doing. Yeah. Yeah. But there does have to be a connection. And, but you're right, at the same time, all of us have connections as sentient beings, because all these sentient beings are produced by our mind.
Right. So you can only help someone else depending on their karma, right?
And that's great skillfulness to learn.
Yeah, the skillful means thing, like that's
Yeah,
where I wish I could get more
of course.
skill.
Yeah, of
It's like,
course.
how do I help this
Yeah.
being the best way? Like, does that
Yeah.
just come with time and practice,
Yeah.
I assume?
Just experience and falling down.
Right.
Yeah, that's the whole thing. We fall down all the time on the Bodhisattva path, but how do we get up?
Mhm.
We fall down because we trip over sentient beings. This one's more than I can handle.
Mhm.
Get out of my life. So right away, I've forgotten my mother, and there it is. But how do I get up? On sentient beings. I take the vow to liberate all sentient beings. So we trip over the sentient beings, but we use the sentient beings to get ourselves up walking again. Yeah. But you see it, with Garchen Rinpoche. You see him in an airport. Some people he connects with, other people he doesn't. But from more experience with him too, there's never this kind of obsession that I'm supposed to be helping sentient beings, because it comes out of that vastness. Sometimes our attempts, we know, to try to help someone, we often make it worse. We can make it worse, especially if there's a perception that we're trying to impose something on them, or there's even the attitude that I know more than you. It's like Dalai Lama says, the whole world thinks of compassion as like looking down at the suffering sentient beings. But he says that's wrong. You're actually looking up to the sentient beings. They've been my mothers. I'm here because of all the stuff that they went through. So that's totally different attitude. And we know that. I mean, we know that in our own lives. Someone's saying to you, nice dress, but really they're sarcastic. You feel that. We're so sensitive as human beings. We come in, there's a boss is having a meeting, and he's all smiling, but everyone knows he's in a bad mood, and no one wants to get near the guy. So yeah, instant karma, right. I wanted to read along these lines. So this is 12th century stuff, but one of the great figures in Christian literature is the Divine Comedy of Dante. So this is from the 1200s, right? And there are 3 big books that he wrote. One was Hell, the Inferno. He goes through all the different levels of hell and the non-virtues that get you there. And then the second one is Purgatory, the purification. And third is Paradiso, the heaven. But I thought this is so interesting, this is the end of him coming out of hell. So first of all, he's getting this tour from Virgil. So it was like this Roman poet, this voice of reason. So we're not throwing away our reason, right? And he's coming out after all of this because they went down, way down below the earth. And he said, my guide, that's Virgil, and I entered that hidden road to make our way back up to the bright world. We never thought of resting while we climbed. We climbed, he first and I behind, until through a small round opening ahead of us, I saw the lovely things the heavens hold, and we came out to see once more the stars. To me, this is a Buddhist verse. You're coming out of samsara, emerging from the swamp, and you see you're rising up, so to speak, and you see this little round hole. You can see with a little bit of vision, and you see the stars. You can't see the vastness of space, but somehow just seeing those stars conveys that sense of vastness to you. And it's beautiful, bright stars. So that's my sense of it anyway, apart from all the eye is a flower and the ear is a piece of bark. What was that?
Just having a discussion. Oh,
Yeah.
is someone online?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. We got Zoomers.
I was having a discussion with someone about upaya, about skillful means, and how for those of us with a more social activist bent, the idea of, if I don't do it, who's going to?
Uh-huh.
And so one looks at other means. For instance, what you were saying before, I know a lot of Buddhist organizations that have gone into the hood, and they march when there are shootings, et cetera, and then they leave.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Everybody leaves. Everybody goes, and then they leave. And they leave nothing.
Right.
So who is that helping?
Exactly.
So what is skillful means? I was conveying a sense of urgency and ego about, well, if not you, if not me, then who? And that you can't go, you have to stay. And you have to stay, and you have to be present. And you have to bring with. And so, and is that the Bodhisattva path? Is that the Bodhisattva path? Is that skillful means, or is that ego at work saying, I have to do this?
Yeah, right. It all depends on motivation.
And
motivation and skillfulness.
Right, so motivation and skillfulness.
And given the context, the environment that you're in, potentialities, everything.
Right. So, just trying to take the Dharma, I'm kind of between worlds when I think, interbeing teaches that our interbeing with everything. If we read Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vajrayana, for me, gives me tools for working with the emotive states that bring people
Mm-hmm.
to their own suffering,
Mm-hmm.
and me to my own suffering,
Mm-hmm.
and gives me a direct link to that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I see so many, and then in the Hinayana, well, I've been reading this book. There is no such thing as the Hinayana, but the Theravada path, in a way, is kind of, at least when you read Alyana, his idea was the Buddha sought enlightenment for himself first.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he went through all of these things and, tried all of these aesthetic paths, and they didn't work. And then when he attained enlightenment, he sort of went, good, I got this. I don't know if I want to share this. This is too good. And then other things came. So how much, if the Hinayana path can be seen as just, we are working on becoming or attaining the personality of the Buddha, or the manifesting the qualities of the Buddha, versus the Bodhisattva path. Doesn't that mean also teaching? Because he did decide to teach also. And that is also, I would say, not the Hinayana, but that would be part of the Theravada, the Theravada path. So it's a horrible thing about going to school. There are all of these avenues to the same thing, and for me the idea is what is useful where and when.
Right, but also you can't tell from outer appearances.
No,
that Theravadan teacher might be a Vajrayana master who is not teaching the Vajrayana, but has penetrated into the Vajra body and is manifesting all these things secretly, nobody knows. And that Lama running around saying he's a Vajrayana master, well, they never do. But if one were to do that, could just be a fraud. I mean, from the outer appearances, you don't know. We just don't know. And the good thing is on the practice, whatever practice we're doing, it's all based on hear, analyze, and meditate. And the great thing about the meditation, at least I think, one of the great things, is that it just destroys your pride. Because immediately you just see you're just overwhelmed with all these thoughts. And you see, my goodness, and they're telling you talk about a calm mind. You say, I don't have a calm mind. So that's a great place to start. Instead of all of us starting like, hey, I'm really together. Instead, we're starting to play a real humility.
Actually, I feel like I'm starting off in a worse place than I started. Because I see more suffering.
But that's not a worse place.
I see more the origins of suffering. I see more every day how people create their own suffering.
That's a good point. That is awareness. It's like Sher Bozer said, you're right now in the room, the air is pure. Ordinary person, look at all the pure air in here. That's great. But the light comes through, sunbeam, you see all the dust motes dancing in it. So that's awareness. And we're thinking like, oh, this is worse. I'm worse than I was, but I'm not. I'm better. The awareness, and it shows us our actual situation. We don't like to see that first noble truth of suffering, that is pervasive. There aren't any refuges apart from truth, dharma, our own mind. So I know it's real. But as far as timing, I mean, who knows? There was a Thailand monk, Theravada monk, there was some king years ago in Taiwan that built all these stupas and all this stuff, but it had all been abandoned, like Angkor Wat or something like that. And this unknown monk walked to one of these abandoned buildings and just started meditating there. And eventually people found out he was there and they started bringing him food and stuff. And the next thing you know, a temple had built around him. And he ended up completely reprinting all of the texts in these very elaborate thing and made an offering of it to the king. And everyone started saying that he was that king who had built that place 500 years before, reborn. But what I'm saying is that he came and stayed, he did. It's that personal commitment, I think, and more than like a, political or emotional commitment, but just a factual commitment. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere, This Japanese monk, I can't remember the name of him, a Zen monk. He's passed away now, but one of the first Zen teachers in the States, lived in Los Angeles, 1930s.
Suzuki?
No, before any of those guys. Well, Suzuki was at that time too, but I can't remember his name. It was a monk in Los Angeles. But he said our era is like holding the lotus to the bare rock, hoping it will take root. It's not easy. We have lots and lots of obstacles because we have this basic dualistic outlook on things. And it's profound teachings.
No, I feel like at Union, one of my favorite professors, and oddly enough, he was the easiest grade. A lot of people didn't like him because there was not a lot of rigor to the course, but he was the most real. Professor is from Uganda, and it's a Theravada monk, Buddha Akita, and started a monastery, has the only Buddhist monastery in Africa.
Amazing. Amazing.
I mean, you can't say that's not Bodhisattva.
Right.
That's not the Bodhisattva.
That's right.
It's just not, you can't say that.
He wasn't bitching and moaning either.
Right.
No, this time's not right.
And you know, when he's teaching from there, we had classes, you know, and then the power would go out.
Yeah.
So he starts teaching by candle. And it was really, really
Wonderful.
Amazing. And then he spends half of his time in the States. But to me, he is the quintessential
Tremendous.
Bodhisattva.
Yeah. All right. We should probably conclude unless there's anything else for anybody. All right. We dedicate the merit from this evening to all motherly sentient beings. May each and every one of them come to recognize his or her true nature and undertake the great task, and may every last one be free. Svaha. Okay. Thank you all.
Thanks so very much.
Thank
to
you.
everyone.
Thank you, Frank.
Yeah, thank you guys. We love you, Zoomers.
Thanks, Frank.
Yeah.
Just about finishing.
Oh, wonderful.
Yes. Better than his other books. You don't want to put yourself over their head.
Dartmouth College. Look at that. Reiko Anuma. Thank you, George.
Yeah.
Of this? There's another book that we haven't started yet after this one that is, I think it's just the Buddha by Michael, remember his name? Crothers. Michael Crothers.
It's in the library.
Yeah.
There's only one copy. I got it.
Yeah. It's basically the life of the Buddha, which somehow, again, the Tibetans don't even rarely talk about. And yet, for me, it's been so valuable because, you know, it's a story and you can relate. And it's obviously a story that has much